Okay, thank you guys so much for joining us tonight for our Passions in Practice, our alumni webinar series. We're really lucky to have Diana Stram, class of 1987, joining us tonight from Alaska to talk about fisheries. I'm grateful that I asked Diana to join us in August to do this webinar because I have a feeling that her answer may have been a little bit different had I approached her more recently. There's a lot of moving pieces with fisheries right now. So we're really lucky to have Diana here and I'm excited to welcome her. Thanks.
Thank you. Do you want me to share my screen now?
That would be perfect. I'm going to go on, turn my video off and turn over the slides. Oh, I always forget this. For those of you who ask questions, I wrote myself a giant note. It's right in front of me. For those of you who ask questions when they registered, I have those and we'll pose those to Diana at the end. But as the presentation goes along, down at the bottom, on the bottom near the right-hand side, you'll see a Q&A tab. Feel free to put any questions in that chat. I will monitor that through the presentation and we'll get to those at the end. Or if I need to interrupt Diana, then I'll ask those during the presentation. So thank you. Yep, Diana, you're all set to share.
Okay, did that work? Can you see the screen okay?
Yes, perfect.
Okay. Thank you, and thank you, Samantha. Thank you for inviting me. I'm excited to talk to everybody today. My name's Diana Stram, and I work for the North Pacific Fishery Management Council. We're based in Anchorage, Alaska. I live in Girdwood, Alaska, which is where I'm calling in from right now, which is about 40 miles southeast. Just to orient you, the picture on your screen is Dutch Harbor, which is in the Aleutian Islands, and it's our biggest processing facility and one of the biggest ports in the United States. So I've got a little bit of a backstory as to how I got into fisheries management, if you'll indulge me, to try to explain how that all happened. Oops. So starting out, obviously, it starts with the Governor's Academy, which is GDA that we called it then. My brother and my sister and I all went there. My brother graduated in 1983, my sister in 1985, and I graduated in 1987. The most important part of that, besides the fact that this are just pictures of my siblings that indulged me a few years ago on a working ranch in Montana, is that my sister's graduation in 1985, then sitting Senator Paul Tsongas from Massachusetts, he was her graduation speaker. And his speech had a really profound effect on me. I don't actually remember who spoke at my graduation, neither my high school, my college, my graduate, but I do remember Paul Tsongas because his entire speech, he was one of the first volunteers in Ethiopia for the Peace Corps. And so his speech was all about the importance of giving back and serving. And it's really was life-changing for me at the age of 16. It changed the whole focus of pretty much everything that I've done moving forward from there. In addition to knowing from that time forward that I wanted to go in the Peace Corps, it's pretty much I've been a public servant for my entire life. So I went to college. I went to Colgate University in upstate New York. And then I went into the Peace Corps. And I was in the Peace Corps in Niger in West Africa from the fall of 1991 to the winter of 1994. Um, I know that this talk is about fisheries management, but if anybody ever wants to talk about the Peace Corps, you can write me, you can call me. I love to talk about the Peace Corps. It was the most profound experience of my entire life. I lived in a small rural village of subsistence agriculture off of about 20 kilometers off of a dirt road on a river that on a village that had been moved out of a national park. And I worked on environmental education and natural resource development. And it was amazing. The people were amazing. The volunteers were amazing. I have nothing but incredible things to say about the Peace Corps, but that's not what this talk is about. I then went on to graduate school when I got back. So I went to the University of Rhode Island, the Graduate School of Oceanography for my PhD. I have a PhD in physical oceanography. Um, so we were moved to Rhode Island, but I actually, my research assistantship and my project was in Ecuador. So my PhD is actually, I worked on an estuary in northern Ecuador. It's called the Rio Chone, and that's what the slide to the right shows you. I did hydrodynamic modeling, so modeling of the residence time of water in the estuary, how long it takes to turn over, and this particular estuary, as well as modeling the shrimp mariculture. So it's surrounded by mangroves, and the common practice is to cut the mangroves out and build shrimp ponds into them. So they're very shallow pools that are flushed. They flush the water through the estuary. So it's not a very sustainable way of fishing practice. It maybe arguably is better than trawling for shrimp, but has its own problems. And so the whole point of my dissertation was modeling both the nitrogen levels in the shrimp ponds, and when those effluents were flushed into the estuary, how long it took for the water quality in the estuary to degrade. But this particular estuary, because of where it's located and because of those shallow ponds that basically form like salt bins. It's a reverse estuary, so it's inverse. And normally in an estuary, the salinity at the mouth of the estuary is much higher than the salinity at the head because you have the fresh water flushing in at the head. But in this particular estuary, during times of the year, it was reversed because of the salt loading that was going on at the head of the estuary. So, anyways, I spent all these years modeling that for my dissertation. Thinking that that was my first experience in natural resource management, thinking that maybe I would go into sustainability and possibly work abroad with the idea of working on shrimp mariculture and how to make it more sustainably practiced. And then we moved to Alaska. So this picture is my husband and my daughter and I. My husband is a ski racing coach. When we lived in Rhode Island, he coached at Brown University. And in my last year of graduate school, he was offered a extremely competitive job with a junior Olympic ski team in Girdwood, Alaska. We were both ski racers by background, and so I knew what that job meant and what that means to him. And to be honest, we are geographically challenged as an oceanographer and a ski coach. So we did enough research to know that I could get a job in Alaska without knowing quite what that job would be. But I was finishing my PhD in oceanography and we just decided to roll the dice. So we moved to Alaska. This picture to the right is a picture of my daughter. She's now in her second year at McGill University in Montreal. But this is when she was growing up, and this is on the mountain in the town that we live in. And then I needed to get a job. So while I was helping my husband out on the hill, in the first couple months that I moved to Alaska, I was talking to the head of his president of his ski club, who, unbeknownst to me at the time, worked for the National Marine Fisheries Service and was in charge of a multi-million, multi-year project assessing the groundfish fisheries in Alaska, both the Gulf of Alaska and the Bering Sea. And he asked me what my degree was in, asked me to send him my CV. And the next day I came in, and through a consulting company, he hired me to work on this project. So I had a real crash course in what fisheries management is, coming from somebody who was an oceanographer and did numerical modeling. So just to start, I learned a lot, and I'll try to give you a little bit of an overview. Real difference in fishery management pre and post the Magnuson-Stevens Act. Prior to 1976, it was a little bit of a free-for-all. There wasn't really nationalization of our fishery waters, and so there's a lot of unregulated fishing fleets and not a lot of national level regulation. Come 1976, then, this is a picture of Senator Warren Magnuson from Washington State and Senator Ted Stevens, who's from here in Alaska. They put together the Magnuson-Stevens Act. And what that did was nationalize all of our federal fisheries. So 3 to 200 miles, we have an exclusive economic zone, the EEZ, and that's federal fisheries. It established the fishery management councils and the fishery management process, and requirements for fishery management plans for all managed target species. It also set up the entire stakeholder process that we still work in and improve upon, as well as regional representation and decision making, and set up the 10 national standards. And kind of a fun fact, actually, and by a series of accidents, it's a long story. My husband and I and my family We actually live in Ted Stevens' house here in Girdwood, Alaska, that we purchased 10 years ago. And as a housewarming gift from, I don't know if you can see this in the video, but from my previous boss, as a housewarming gift, he gave us a copy of the original Magnuson-Stevens Act, one of the drafts that went through Congress. So that's kind of fun to have and kind of a fun legacy to be here for. So the Regional Fishery Management Councils, then, there's 8 of them nationally by each different region: New England, Mid-Atlantic, South Atlantic, Gulf of Mexico, Pacific, the Caribbean, Western Pacific, and then I obviously work for the North Pacific. We are the only council that actually is only one state, but we have representation from both Washington State and Oregon because of our fishing fleet. And we have more real estate than everyone else because we have the entire Gulf of Alaska and the Bering Sea. So the way councils work, if you're not familiar with it, the council, so our North Pacific Council, works with the National Marine Fisheries Service, and together we're partners in managing the fisheries off Alaska. The council technically as a political body, makes recommendations to the National Marine Fisheries Service, and then it's the responsibility of the National Marine Fisheries Service to approve, implement, and enforce regulations. For us, because of the stocks that we manage, we also work collaboratively with the state of Alaska, particularly in terms of crab management and scallop management. We also have advisory bodies. We have different advisory bodies. We have an advisory panel that is user groups. These are all nominated and approved, and they have seats that last a variety of time in terms of representing various user groups in our process. We have a science and statistical committee, and so that is a scientific review body that all of our, when we do analyses or any kind of stock assessment, it goes through our SSC, and then our SSC makes recommendations as well as the advisory panel to the council. I'll get into it a little bit later, but when it comes to harvest limits, by design, our SSC makes the binding limit. So the science committee tells the council the maximum amount they can harvest, and then they can set their harvest at or below that, but they cannot set it above it. And as a side note, when the Magnuson Act was revised in 2007, our fishery management system in the North Pacific and the way we set harvest limits were the framework for how the Magnuson Act was revised for all other councils, so that the way that we have set limits and the way that our process is unfolded in terms of our plan teams and how we set our harvest limits was the backbone for how the Magnuson Act was revised. We also have plan teams. Again, I'll touch on this a little bit later. These are stock assessment evaluation plan teams. We have them for each of our FMPs, for groundfish, for scallop, for crab. And that's part of our peer review process, and that generally the plan teams meet, review, make recommendations to the SSC. The SSC meets, reviews those, and then makes the recommendations to the council. We also have committees. Sometimes they're standing committees. Sometimes it's an issue-specific committee that'll last for a little while. Sometimes we have committees that are annual and last for years. So we have 6 different fishery management plans in our region for where we manage. For scallop, for salmon, we don't manage salmon actually in river, but we do have a fishery management plan for salmon that's in the EEZ, and then we manage groundfish in the Gulf of Alaska and the Bering Sea, and crab in the Bering Sea. In terms of who's on the council, there are 15 members. 11 are voting. 4 of them are the designated seats for different agencies: National Marine Fisheries Service, Alaska Department of Fish and Game, Washington and Oregon Departments of Fish and Wildlife. There are 7 appointed seats, and so 5 of those are from Alaska, and this is all fixed in the Magnuson Act. So the representation is something that is written in law. 5 of those seats come from Alaska, 2 come from the state of Washington. To become a council member, you're nominated by the governor of your respective state and then approved by the Secretary of Commerce. And then we also have non-voting seats for the Coast Guard, Pacific States Marine Fisheries Commission, the Department of State, and U.S. Fish and Wildlife. And we also have a NOAA General Counsel that sits as an advisory to the council as well. So what kind of management actions are taken up? This is just a short list. We take up a lot of different actions, but in general, on an annual level, we set harvest quotas. We set what are called prohibited species catch limits. That's basically bycatch limits, and those, I'm happy to talk more about it later, but those can get very controversial But in general, when we have non-target species, particularly prohibited species, which are when you're catching groundfish, you are not allowed to catch salmon, you're not allowed to catch halibut or crab. And so those, and there's others too. But we also set gear and season and area restrictions, habitat protection measures. There are built into our system community protection measures to make sure that that different communities have a stake in the fisheries. And in one of our programs that has been in place since 1991, it has set up Western Alaska to really have an incredible stake in the fisheries to make sure that things stay local as well as participation from elsewhere. And we have extensive monitoring programs, limited access privileges in the Bering Sea in particular. Almost all of our fisheries are rationalized, and that means that the sectors and the fisheries own the quota that they have. In the Gulf of Alaska, there's more of an open access aspect to it, but interest in rationalizing some of the fisheries. And then conservation and management measures as they come up, which comes up all the time. Again, we do work with different state, federal, and international organizations. We work with the International Halibut Commission, Pacific Halibut Commission, in managing halibut. They do the assessment of halibut, but our allocation in Alaska as compared to Canada requires coordination and allocation measures with them. Crab, we also share management with the Alaska Department of Fish and Game. For groundfish, that's our more primary management. Again, working with the National Marine Fisheries Service, but the actual catch limits and prosecution of that fishery is under the jurisdiction of the council. So just a kind of a snapshot of our fishing fleet. So just, primarily catcher vessels and catcher processors. So catcher processors, if you don't know, are the more industrial. That's when they catch and they process on board. So a lot of those vessels are very large, particularly the ones that are fishing in the pollock fleet as well as the flatfish fleet. There's also longline catcher processors that fish for cod and sablefish and Greenland turbot. Catcher vessels are usually delivering shoreside, so they're going shorter distances and bringing that fish back shoreside to be processed at a shoreside facility. There are also catcher vessels that deliver to things called motherships, and so motherships are floating processors that have catcher vessels that are associated with them. All of this requires a complex level of regulation and coordination in terms of who catches what and how. I put a little snapshot of some of the boats down here, going from the smallest and some of the longline and tender vessels. And then as you move across, you see the third picture there is a catcher processor and one of the larger ones. And then to the right is a crab boat in the Bering Sea where you see a pile of pots on there. These are really nice pictures of very calm weather. That's not actually how things go in the Bering Sea and the Gulf of Alaska. So this is a little bit more of a snapshot of what they're really facing. It can be frozen. There's really high seas. It's very dangerous. A lot of the work that we've done over the years is to try to make it less dangerous. If anybody's ever seen The Deadliest Catch, that is our crab fishery that we rationalized in 2005, primarily to increase the safety at sea, so that they're not rushing for the catch and that they can try to make informed decisions on when weather openings are. A little snapshot of our groundfish then. On the top here, you'll see pollock. If you don't know, pollock in the Bering Sea is the largest fishery by volume in the United States. It's usually about 1.2 metric tons per year. Pollock is, if you don't know it, you've probably had it if you've ever gone to McDonald's and had a fish sandwich there. It's also processed as surimi and is used in making like fake crab or fake lobster. And the roe is also processed and is a delicacy in both in Asia as well as across the US. We also have on a smaller volume but higher value Pacific cod and sablefish, which is also called black cod. And those are prosecuted by different gear types. Sablefish is caught in the longline fishery. Cod can be in multiple gear types. And then we have mixed flatfish fisheries that are generally caught by bottom trawl and sometimes by midwater trawl. it's hard to express how incredibly stakeholder driven our process is, both in terms of who's on the council, who represents on the advisory bodies, but also everything we do is public. Absolutely everything. We do not have a single meeting or a single committee or anything that isn't open to the public, takes in public comment. We have public comment that's submitted written. We have public comment periods at every meeting on bigger issues. Sometimes we'll have hundreds of people commenting to the council. We've been increasing that too. We used to have just a one-way listening mechanism on our council meetings, but over the past years, in an attempt to really reach out to especially interior Alaska that doesn't always have the money to travel to our meetings, we've done a two-way. So now you can actually participate virtually and comment virtually from your village. We've had fishermen that call in from boats and make accommodations to make sure that we can time their comments for the process. I mean, the process doesn't exist without the stakeholder participation, and that's what really makes us. We've been a world model for responsible fisheries management in the North Pacific. I mean, general, the U.S. fishery management system, but particularly the way the North Pacific has cultivated its process and how we've been increasing it through all of these public opportunities. So I feel really strongly about the fact that we have an incredible process we're still evolving. And then when we find out that we're not doing it well enough, we try to change things and make it better so it's more accessible. Just a quick snapshot of some of the items that we're dealing with at the moment. There's a million different ones. As I mentioned earlier, we always have bycatch issues. Those are some of the most controversial things that we work on. And it's fish that are accidentally caught while prosecuting a different fishery. I've spent most of my career working on salmon and halibut bycatch issues. I'm not going to go over that right now, but I'm happy to answer any questions on it. But they're big issues and they're very controversial and they affect everyone. We've done outreach in interior Alaska because even though we don't manage salmon fisheries in interior Alaska, when someone's catching a salmon in an offshore fishery, it could affect somebody up the Yukon in Galena and McGrath and the Kuskokwim. I've gone out to those communities with council members to try to explain how we're trying to manage offshore so that they have a better chance of getting their subsistence fish inshore. I will talk a little bit about we just initiated a climate work plan. We're still working on that. That just happened in December, and I'll talk through that a little. And then currently right now we are in our annual groundfish stock assessment process, and I will talk about that because that is actually affected by what's going on right now with the ongoing shutdown in the government. But just to talk about a climate work plan, in 2019, the council initiated a climate change task force. I co-chaired that with my colleague at the Alaska Fisheries Science Center, Kristen Holmesman, who's a climate scientist. And we spent 5 years working with our task force trying to put forward recommendations for climate-ready fisheries management in the North Pacific, and particularly in the Bering Sea. A little backstory, because in putting together this work plan and in getting buy-in from it's important to understand how the buy-in happens. We don't just put forward a recommendation and then all the stakeholders believe in it. It's been challenging in the North Pacific. Like things are harder at the poles. This just gives you the temperature change in the Bering Sea relative to the average from 71 to 2000. And so if you look to the far right, obviously you'll see all of the red and all the times that our temperature in the Bering Sea has been increasing. It's similar in the Gulf of Alaska. And so we're trying to deal with the non-stationarity of how the environment is unfolding and what it does to our fish stocks and how it affects things. Just a couple snapshots. This isn't important to read all the information here, but it's meant to just show you that different aspects, kind of where the ice extent was in recent years and where it's been, where it was historically. In an Arctic environment such as we have in the Bering Sea, the ice edge really makes a huge difference. So when the ice recedes sooner or doesn't form, we don't get the same distribution of stocks. We have more vulnerable stocks I'll talk about it in a little bit, but it really affects the vulnerability of both of our stocks to being surveyed, to recruitment, to the health of the resource, and to the cold pool distribution in the Bering Sea. So The ice edge and the ice extent we monitor. We also have had multiple marine heat waves. If you've ever seen anything on the news in the Gulf of Alaska, if you look at what number 6 is, we had a marine heat wave that persisted for over 2 years in the Gulf of Alaska. It was dubbed in common media as the blob, but that had a huge effect on our Gulf cod stocks. So just quickly about Gulf of Alaska Pacific cod and the decline that we experienced there and where we're going from there. Again, sea surface temperature. This is just showing you sea surface temperature historically and what it's been in recent years, and especially over the years 2014 to 2016, and the fact that we had this extreme marine heat wave. That has a lot of different effects, a lot of cascading effects. You end up with fewer large lipid-rich copepods, which are at the base of the forage in the ecosystem, phytoplankton. Corresponding low forage fish abundance, lower forage fish quality. So the quality of the forage fish is also impacted. Big seabird die-offs and reproductive failure. But as it relates specifically to cod, which is the stock that completely crashed, what we found was poor condition and increased natural mortality of juveniles and adults following that marine heat wave. We do annual stock assessments. In the Gulf of Alaska, we have a survey that happens every other year. In the Bering Sea, it happens every year. So while the stock assessment is constantly catching up with the information as it's available, the trawl survey has observation error. It only happens every other year. And so sometimes there's a lag between the time that the collapse begins and the time that we actually detect it. So even though the 2014 to 2016 was the marine heat wave, it wasn't really until 2017 that we started to see the complete collapse of the cod stock. Bering Sea snow crab is arguably the poster child for climate change. Again, we have an annual survey in the Bering Sea, and in general, assessing crab stocks is really difficult. It's very volatile in terms of what you can pick up in surveys. So we started to see a little bit of an indication that there might have been a decline. We had a high year class in about 2017, 2018, and then 2019, not sure. You never put a lot of faith in that last data point until you can validate it a year later. But then COVID hit. And so 2020, we didn't have a survey. And unfortunately, what we missed was the complete collapse of the snow crab stock, not through anyone's fault. It's just that's the way things happen. And so basically, we've learned a lot from this experience. The population collapse is also related to a marine heat wave. Basically, starvation, increased metabolic demands due to the heat wave, the decreased spatial extent of the crab population. Snow crab and all king crab as well are ice-associated species. So it's expected that productivity in snow crab as well as king crab, it will decline as with the loss of the Arctic conditions in the Bering Sea. We're seeing some positive signs, and I listed a couple different articles that have been published on all of this. We're seeing a little bit of positive signs in crab population recruitment now, both for red king crab, which declined, and for snow crab. But the overall level, it's just going to be volatile from here on out. It's not going to be something that we suddenly have a huge resurgence. And just to put that in real terms, this is just ex-vessel revenue and the loss of that over the course of the Bristol Bay red king crab decline and then the total collapse of the Bering Sea snow crab fishery. And it's real implications. There's lost jobs both in the harvesting and the processing sector. That means lost revenue for communities that support those businesses. And while all of these have been filed for disaster relief, that takes time. And so when these losses are felt by fishermen, it takes time for any of that disaster relief to get back to the communities and to it's been a real suffering for the crab industry in the Bering Sea. So this, bringing it back to our climate change work plan, these are all the reasons why we have so much buy-in right now, because people are feeling these issues. People are experiencing these. So just generally, we had 3 big objectives: collating the information of what we know about climate impacts in the Bering Sea, synthesizing that to try to look at what some adaptation actions are and could be that the council could adopt. And then finally, in 2024, building out a process for final report and recommendations to the council. We also had a climate scenario planning workshop in addition to this for several days in Kodiak in June of 2024. We created different scenarios of risk and how you might adapt to risk, and then brought people together from diverse backgrounds and experiences to talk about it. We might not be able to change what happens, but we might be able to change our perception of the risk and look at different adaptation actions like diversification or changes so that if we see something coming again, how can we do a better job of responding? Oops, sorry. So that's where we ended up. And the council adopted a work plan that we're building out right now. We're starting with the first steps of it. Some of the elements that were key to this are having an inclusive process. That's one of the really important lessons we learned, is making sure that this process is inclusive of all diverse opinions and experiences. And then also on the other extreme, laying out some tools that we might begin to address. And so the first step that we're going is looking at our harvest limits that we already have a really vigorous process for, but can we make that more climate resilient? And how do we look at our different stocks? Should we be harvesting them differently in response to climate change? And that's what we're in the process of doing. So going back to the final part that I wanted to talk about is the process that we're in right now. This is our annual stock assessment process for ground fish in the Bering Sea and the Gulf of Alaska. And just to briefly walk you through, we have summer surveys in the Gulf of Alaska every other year, in the Bering Sea every year, in the Aleutian Islands every other year. That information gets synthesized there's two Alaska Fisheries Science Centers. One's in Juneau, Alaska, the other's in Seattle, Washington. We have a range of stock assessment scientists, agent growth, survey experts, an incredible array of scientists that work at these centers and compile this information. And then we have stock assessment authors that compile that into an annual stock assessment. We have a plan team for both the Gulf of Alaska and the Bering Sea. We meet in the fall. We meet first in September to look at survey data and look at different assessment modeling strategies to recommend which ones we think should go forward in this cycle. That then, as everything does, again, these meetings are public. Everything we do is public. That goes to our SSC and our council then in October. So we just had that meeting 2 weeks ago. We had to do it virtually due to funding. Normally we meet in person. And then the SSC makes recommendations and the council approves them to go back to the stock assessments so that then when the stock assessments are compiled in October, and then we meet to review them, the beginning part of that peer review process starts with our plan teams. Unfortunately, we're in a shutdown right now, and we won't have stock assessments. We have the information, we have the surveys, we have the draft stock assessments, but all of those people are not working right now, and they're not allowed to. So we're, as Samantha alluded to, this is a really challenging time for us because we don't know when we might have those people back, but the council still has to set catch specifications. We don't have catch specifications for 2026 right now. We set those in December, and we do it on the best available information that we have. And we're in the process of trying to worst case scenario what we do next. So what happens next, I can't really tell you. All I can say is that we have historically been the most precautionary and responsible council in the United States, and especially on setting catch limits. We'll do it on the best available science that we have. We just don't know what that's going to be right now because we can't talk to anyone. We don't have those assessments. We already know today was the last day of our third worst case scenario. So starting tomorrow, we go into our fourth worst case scenario, and that entails we won't have assessments. So what might we have, or will we even have a plan team meeting? But at some point, the council and the SSC will have to set catch specifications, or we can't open fisheries in 2026. So I hate to be a little grim. It's just that's the reality of what's happening right now. I would end on a note. Oops, I'm sorry. I would end on a note that we have a history of successful management. We have diverse fisheries. We have very small fisheries. If you look to the far left, we are, I believe, the only fishery in the world possibly that has a crab fishery that is through the ice. It's in Nome, Alaska. They drill holes in the ice in the wintertime. It's a very small fishery, but for Norton Sound king crab. And then they put pots through the ice, kind of like you would do ice fishing anywhere else. And that's an actual commercial fishery that way, with snow machines through the ice. Um, The middle shows you the processing plant in Akutan. You can see some crab pots that are stored in Dutch Harbor. Those are always stored on land when the fishery is not operational. And then just a variety of the different fisheries from factory trawlers to rockfish to, again, like a crab pot. It's a system that I sincerely believe in. I've worked there for 23 years. I know we'll get through this as well, and we'll figure out the best way forward. Just as a final, I've been very lucky throughout the course of my career with the council. I was awarded a Fulbright in Chile in 2015. I went to Chile for 5 months. I worked with their fisheries management department, the subsecretariat of fisheries, on a variety of fishery management aspects. I also was asked to give them, I provided them biweekly lectures on how our fishery management program is organized, both for how we do catch accounting, how we set limits, all of the aspects of our fishery management program that's made it such a model for world success. I was lucky enough that my daughter and my husband could come down as well. We also happened to be there for the Copa America when the first time, kind of like the Red Sox in 2004, it's the first time that the Chile's ever won, and they came from behind. And it was an amazing time from a sports fan to be there. So that was really fun. And then I was also very fortunate to be awarded a Fulbright in Madagascar in 2022 to work with their Ministry of Fisheries and the Blue Economy. And again, all based on how our fishery management program is organized in the North Pacific and trying to provide that information to others. So thank you very much for listening, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you have. I also left my contact info on the first slide. If you ever want to email me, I'm always happy to talk to people.
Diana, awesome. Thank you so much. I have to believe that this was really hard to put together and you've only scratched the surface of the work that you're doing. So thank you. I can't imagine this was easy to do. So we do have some questions, some folks that submitted when they registered, and we have a few others in the Q&A. One question is, are bycatch regulations and limits set in coordination with commercial and community socioeconomic considerations?
Thank you. Yeah, that's a great question. That's actually something that we do. We through any analysis that we do, and I think I couldn't put all the slides in there. I didn't think you wanted all the mundane how we go through analyses, but any analysis that we do that eventually results in regulations goes through multiple iterations in the public process. Sometimes the original proposal is put forward by a committee, sometimes it's put forward by stakeholders, sometimes it's put forward by a council member, but then it goes through multiple iterations. So we have been setting bycatch limits since 1976. They vary. You know, you try to do something and it doesn't work. A lot of times in the early days, we would do time area closures. So a limit would set a time area closure. And then we eventually found, obviously, that that's pretty static. And so we try to go to a more abundance-based way of setting limits. We spent 5 years setting abundance-based limits for halibut in the Bering Sea. That just concluded a few years ago. We're right now in the process of redoing the chum salmon bycatch limits that we have in the pollock fishery. We've iteratively worked on Chinook salmon bycatch limits in the pollock fishery. So it involves everyone. And we've done tons of outreach. That's what we've learned a lot, is that we were missing some of the people that are affected by these regulations that don't participate naturally in our process. And so we started bringing council members out into interior Alaska to have community outreach meetings to try to explain how best to participate and what the action is that we're doing and how it might affect them or not.
There's another question here. Would love to know, what is one of the more memorable public meetings you were present for and what made it memorable?
Well, I mean, there's a lot. When we first set limits for Chinook salmon bycatch in the pollock fishery, hard limits. Again, like moving off of time area closures, when we say something's a hard limit, it means if you reach it, you shut down the fishery. So it was very controversial for Chinook salmon when we first did it in 2009, because it literally would, hitting that limit would shut down the biggest fishery in the United States. So that was a super controversial meeting with about 300 people testifying. But in doing that, that's when we kind of learned that we needed to do more outreach. And so we went to these interior communities, and I had the I don't know if it's misfortune, but twice in 1 week I had a meeting, and it's a place called Mountain Village. And you get there, you can fly into Mountain Village, but the way that their runway is situated, if the wind is wrong, you can't get out. And so I had meetings 2 weeks in a row, 1 week in a row, and both times I had to be snow machined 20 miles up the Yukon River to get to St. Mary's, the next airport, because you couldn't get out of a mountain village. I mean, at first it was extraordinary, and then a week later it happened again. I was like, oh my God, this is the second week in a row that I've been snow machined up the Yukon just to get home. So those were pretty memorable.
Um, where do you see the future of fish farming?
Boy, that's tricky in Alaska. I I have I started my dissertation working on with shrimp mariculture farmers. So I think there's a lot of benefit in general to aquaculture and fish farming to meet the needs as growing population. But when you're here in Alaska, we have one of the last remaining wild salmon populations in the world. And so when it comes to something like salmon farming, people are very, very against it in Alaska. It happens in British Columbia. When we were down in Chile, there is so much salmon farming in Chile, but nobody wants salmon farms in Alaska to outcompete wild salmon. So it's tricky. I think it depends on there's quahog farming here, there's oyster farming, there's different things, but it really depends on which species you're talking about fish farming. At least here in Alaska, I do believe in it as a general sense.
There is someone that has their hand raised, Quinn Pollock. So I think Dee is going to help us by unmuting Quinn. Go ahead, Quinn.
Yep, thank you. Thank you, Diane. It's nice to see people doing important things from our classes. My question is, you talk an awful lot about the ocean-based fisheries, and how much does that correspond to the anadromous fish, the salmonids?
Yeah, so thank you, Quinn, for that. It's nice to talk to you. Thank you for the question. So I mostly talk about ocean-based fisheries because that's how we manage. So the way that we work with the state of Alaska, and it's different by states, but for us here in the North Pacific, the state of Alaska is solely responsible for salmon in river, and we have a ban on salmon, except for it gets complicated, except for one small part of the Cook Inlet. We have a ban on salmon being caught in the open ocean, and we don't manage salmon. They do the assessment and the management of all of the anadromous fish. We do, we have a Pacific Salmon Treaty, and so we have responsibilities under the Pacific Salmon Treaty with Canada in terms of particularly as it relates to Chinook, there's a certain amount of fish that are meant to make it through the river system up into Canada under the treaty. And so those kind of work with different government bodies. But as a council for the North Pacific, we don't what we deal with are salmon bycatch. So we have to deal with when our fisheries catch those salmon as bycatch accidentally, and then how we respond to that. So that's kind of where our intersection is with anadromous. We don't catch we only catch chum and chinook in offshore fisheries. We don't catch the other three species. Those are pretty inshore.
I have a few questions here on things that I'm going to go back to my statement at the end. Like you, I feel like you scratched the surface. So I have a few questions, that things that you talked about, but I just want to give you an opportunity if you want to dive in a little bit deeper on them. How did being a Fulbright scholar play into your education?
That's a great question. My original life plan was that when I finished graduate school, I wanted to go back down to Ecuador. I had made some connections. I wanted to be a Fulbright scholar in Ecuador after I finished graduate school, and I wanted to work abroad. But again, life sort of went in a different direction, and I ended up in Alaska. And um, Normally, I would say most Fulbrights don't work for the government. They usually tend to be academics. So I had I had a decade or more of time to convince my boss to let me apply, because I really wanted that experience. And I thought that it was not only good for me personally, but I also thought it was good for the council because we were working to use our management program to explain what things could possibly be done. We were down in Chile in a really interesting time. They were just revising their fishery management law. And so it was a really interesting time. I feel like for both myself as well as my colleagues down there, because we learned a lot from each other in trying to say, okay, you want to do this. This is how we did that. What does your law allow you to do versus what we're able to do under our Magnuson Act? I don't know if that answers the question, but it was for me, it was amazing, and being able to then go and do a shorter one in Madagascar with their Ministry of Fisheries, similarly trying to take our experience in the North Pacific and try to apply it to helping them with some of the problems that they were facing.
And then there's another question that goes into how is and you've talked about this a little bit, but again, how's the government shutdown and politics impacting the work that you're doing? Which you and I
Yeah,
have talked about, so I know that this can go on for a long time.
yeah, it's really hard to say. I mean, so I guess the short answer is like we're government funded, but we're not true government workers. I work for a political body, and we have responsibilities that don't end when the government shuts down. So we just had our October meeting. We tried to front load everything that we needed government scientists for the first 2 days, and then on October 1st, we've been on our own. But we still have to get the work done. So it has to happen anyways. I mean, we have to have catch limits. That's our most immediate pressing problem, I would say, right now, because we set up timelines and we don't do, there's lots of time that's spent contingency planning when this stuff happens. And we set up timelines for how much time goes by in a shutdown when we stop dropping down the information that we're going to have available. So we're already in the worst of that situation. But at some point, we will scramble to find what information we can bring forward, and the council will still have to set harvest limits. Um, it'd be a lot easier with our federal counterparts. And those are the real experts.
We have another person who raised their hand. So Anne, if you want to ask your question.
Oh, hi, Diana. It's Anne Cole Norman. Very nice to see you. Um, I'm here with my son, George. Well, this is all really fascinating. My son, George, goes to the Harbor Middle School, a maritime school here, middle school here in Brooklyn. So we've both been very interested to hear what you had to say. But anyway, George and I were both wondering, why is salmon banned in the ocean? Is that just because it's been overfished or yeah.
Thanks, Anne. It's nice to talk to you too. It's good to see you. Um, so that's a great question. The reason why it's banned, they're the fisheries for salmon are in river. They're not, it's not that they're all in river. They're just offshore of the rivers. The reason why we have an offshore ban is because the way that we set up our regulations, it's not that the salmon is overfished at all. It hasn't anything to do with that. It has to do with the motivation to not catch them because they're coming back to the stream to spawn. So you don't want to decrease the amount of salmon that can get back to the streams to spawn. And it's sometimes unavoidable in our groundfish fisheries not to catch salmon. And so the last thing that the council and the regulations want to do is make it palatable to catch those salmon accidentally in an offshore fishery. They want to make it extremely unpalatable so that the motivation to not intercept them before they come back to their natal streams is not there. So we actually have prohibitions. Not only do we have limits on how many can be accidentally caught, we also have prohibitions so that when they are caught, they're called prohibited species, which means that you cannot profit from or process them for profit. So a lot of them are donated to food banks if the particular vessel or processing capacity is there in order to process them into a food bank worthy aspect. But if it were legal to land them in an offshore fishery, then you would have problems inshore. So they're not trying to catch them. They're trying actively not to catch them. And now we've made that more stringent so that now the motivation to avoid them is even higher because they can be shut down. I don't know if that answers your question, but that's kind of the way our regulations work. And there's been offshore bans on there's been a ban on salmon fishing in the ocean offshore. I don't even know how long ago that ban happened, but right now what we deal with is trying not to catch them as bycatch.
I think we're at our last question, unless anyone wants to throw one in. And when this one came through, I thought maybe it was a plant, considering who sent it. But when I shared with Diana that her husband put a question in, she had no idea it was coming. So, what's the craziest thing that happened to you on your job?
Well, I guess I already alluded to that. I think one of the craziest things was snow machining up the Yukon in the snowstorm to catch a flight. Both my colleague and I had to be snow machined on two different snow machines. And by the time we finally made it to our flight, my friend Nicole looked at me on the plane, a teeny tiny little plane, and she's like, I can't feel my feet. And I think I dropped my sleeping bag somewhere on the Yukon. And and then it happened to me again a week later. So that's kind of it. I mean, there's different things. You know, we were really lucky to go up to Nome and have a crab planting meeting up there, and they brought us out on the ice to drill through the ice to show us how that tiny little fishery that's really important to the community of Nome, Alaska works. Um, I've been able to go out to Dutch Harbor multiple times. Even my mother came out to Dutch Harbor because I had to bring my 3-month-old daughter with me to a meeting. And so my mother flew all the way from New Hampshire to Dutch Harbor and the Aleutian Islands to help me take care of my daughter so that I could go to my meeting in Dutch Harbor. It's a pretty crazy place to be. I've been out to St. Paul in the Pribilofs, which is, if you don't know anything about St. Paul, it's an extraordinary community that is very reliant on fur seals and has a really crazy background. I won't go into it, but it's right in the middle of the Bering Sea. It is really far from anywhere else. And I was lucky enough to have an opportunity to both get into St. Paul as well as get out of St. Paul, because sometimes you get in and you don't get out for months. So I was happy to get in and get out. There's a lot. It's, you know, we've been lucky to have the resources and the ability to reach out to different communities to travel around in the state and visit processing plants. I've been out on a pollock vessel. I was able to go out on a 140-foot pollock vessel to test out salmon excluders on a pollock net in 20-foot seas. Normally our job is at a computer and in a lot of meeting rooms. So there's some things that are really cool. There's a lot of it that's a lot of meetings and a lot of computer time. But I honestly believe so strongly in our organization that it's a pleasure to work for them.
Diana, they're not letting you go. We got three more.
You can stay as long as you want.
Julie put one in the chat, but she wants to say hi in person instead.
Hi, Jules.
Hi, Di. How are you?
Good. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. Everybody, this is Julie Donay, in case so hi, whoever's listening. I'm glad you're here listening to Diana's speech because she's one of the most awesome people I know. And my question is, of all of the fish that is able to be caught right now, either in the Pacific Northwest or anywhere, what do you think is the tastiest?
Well, I think that my husband and I would have different opinions on that, but since you're asking me and not Sparky, I would say king salmon and halibut, but also rockfish is pretty amazing. I personally don't like sablefish that much, but a lot of people love black cod. I tend to depending on whatever controversial issue I'm working on, I tend to have an aversion to that particular fish for a period of time. But so sometimes we go a time without eating salmon or halibut. But in general, those would be my favorites. And actually, white king, so winter king, white king salmon is amazing.
I've got two sort of Alaska questions that I think I'll sort of put together. So what are the pros and cons of life in Alaska, and are there enough people who are eager to be professional fishermen and women in Alaska?
Oh, those are great questions. To answer the second one first, I think I'm probably not the best person to speak to that because you get a variety of opinions if you talk to fishermen. I think that there's plenty of people. I think the pros and cons of rationalizing fisheries is that you leave people out. So I think that's one of the problems we're constantly facing is that they call it the graying of the fleet because when people own property rights they can lease them to somebody else and not fish. And then there's younger generations that come in and the inequity of not being able to come into a fishery and buy into it. So we're dealing with that as well. But I would say that might be, I don't think that it's not that the eagerness is not there. I think that there are barriers that we've put in place inadvertently by trying to make things safer and more manageable. Pros and cons of living in Alaska. It's an incredible place. I feel lucky to have moved up here. I really missed moving. When we moved out of New England and left Rhode Island, I mean, we both cried. I love it there. It's an amazing place. But so is here. Getting here is often challenging. Getting in and out of here is challenging. Getting decent vegetables is challenging. Um, I just, we were just with my daughter in Montreal and going to a fruit and vegetable market there. I mean, we were just so jealous. So there's really great things. We also, I can walk to a ski mountain. We can hike from our door. You can, the access to the outside here and to this to utter beauty is incredible. But yeah, there are pros and cons to living this far away from everything else. But I wouldn't change it.
I'm hesitating just in case someone puts one more in. So I think we've reached the end. This was fascinating. Thank you so much, Diana, for joining us. And again, I know it's super busy, and I know you're about to get off this call and go be busy again. So I thank you for taking a pause in your day and sharing this with us. It's been amazing. So thank you.
Well, thank you for the invitation. I appreciated it.
Yeah, no, it was great. It was excellent. Our next Passions in Practice is Wednesday, November 5th. Jack Lamson, class of 2007, will be joining us. He is a master brewer in Glen Falls, New York. So he'll be talking about his journey, which is he started as a news anchor and landed as a master brewer. So he'll talk about his journey and talk about brewing beer. So we hope that you'll join us then. But thank you for joining us tonight. This was excellent. I look forward to seeing you all again on screen or in person. Thanks. Have a good night.